one farmhouse on a mountain in rural Virginia, and a family so beloved that millions of Americans rearranged their Thursday nights just to sit with them. But behind the warm glow of that set, real actors were quietly disappearing from the story. Some by choice, some by tragedy, and some because life simply refused to follow a script. This is the untold story of why the Walton family, as America knew it, never truly stayed whole. When the Waltons premiered on CBS in September 1972, few executives believed a quiet drama about a Depression-era family in the fictional community of Walton's Mountain could survive against flashier competition. It did more than survive. It became a cultural phenomenon, drawing audiences who found something rare on television, a family that argued, struggled financially, prayed together, and loved each other without irony. The show was created by Earl Hamner Jr., who based much of the story on his own childhood in Schuyler, Virginia, and who narrated the series as the adult voice of John Boy Walton looking back on his youth. That personal foundation gave the show an emotional authenticity that resonated far beyond its rural setting. Audiences didn't just watch the Waltons, they adopted them. But television families, unlike real ones, are built on contracts, schedules, and the unpredictable turns of human life. And over 9 seasons, the Walton household on screen quietly lost several of the people who made it feel real, for reasons that had nothing to do with ratings and everything to do with the lives the actors were living off camera. The most famous departure, the one that shook viewers to their core, was Richard Thomas, who played John Boy, the eldest son and the show's emotional and narrative anchor. Thomas was a character audiences related to most directly, an aspiring writer navigating poverty, ambition, and family duty in a way that mirrored Hamner's real biography. For 5 seasons, Thomas carried much of the show's dramatic weight, and by the mid-1970s, he had become one of the most recognizable young actors in America. Yet in 1977, after the 5th season, Thomas made the decision to leave the role that had defined his career. He has spoken over the years about the pressures that came with playing a single character so intensely for so long at a formative point in his professional life. There was a real fear, common among young actors who become identified with one iconic role, of being permanently boxed in, unable to be seen as anything other than John Boy Walton for the rest of his career. Thomas wanted to test himself in film and on stage, to prove there was range beyond the mountain cabin and the family dinner table. There was also a deeply personal dimension to his choice. Around this period, Thomas and his wife welcomed triplets, and the demands of a rigorous television production schedule became increasingly difficult to reconcile with the realities of raising young children. Leaving a hit series at the height of its popularity was a significant risk, one that could have ended his career rather than expanded it. Instead, Thomas went on to build a respected body of work across theater, television, and film for decades afterward, eventually returning to television anthology and prestige drama roles that prove his instincts had been correct. When he departed, the production did not erase John Boy from the narrative. Instead, the character was recast, with actor Robert Whiteman stepping into the role for the final 2 seasons, a bold and controversial decision that many longtime fans never fully accepted, precisely because Thomas had made the character feel so singularly his own. If Thomas's exit was a story of ambition and timing, Ellen Corby's departure from full participation in the series was a story of resilience in the face of devastating misfortune. Corby played Grandma Esther Walton, the sharp-tongued, deeply loving matriarch whose chemistry with her on-screen husband, Will Geer, gave the show some of its most tender and comedic moments. In 1976, during the show's production, Corby suffered a serious stroke that affected her speech and mobility. For an actress whose performance relied heavily on quick, cutting dialogue delivered with impeccable comic timing, this was a profound personal and professional blow. Rather than quietly writing her character out or recasting the role, the production made an unusual and compassionate choice. The writers incorporated Corby's real health struggle into the storyline itself, having Grandma Walton suffer a stroke on screen as well, allowing Corby to return to the show gradually as she recovered, and to portray her character's own physical rehabilitation in a way that mirrored her real experience. It was an extraordinary blending of art and life, one that required immense courage from Corby, who insisted on continuing to work despite the visible physical toll the stroke had taken on her. Her limited mobility and altered speech pattern became part of the character's later years on the show, and audiences watched not just a fictional grandmother growing older, but a real woman fighting to reclaim her voice and her craft in front of millions of viewers. Corby remained connected to the Walton family in various capacities through much of the show's remaining run, though her appearances became less frequent as her health continued to be fragile. Her determination to keep working, even in diminished physical condition, became one of the quieter but more moving stories of the entire production. Then there was a loss that no contract negotiation or creative decision could have prevented: the death of Will Geer, who played Grandpa Zebulon Walton. Geer was a veteran actor with a long and storied career that stretched back decades before the Waltons, including a period during the McCarthy era, when he had been blacklisted from Hollywood for his political associations and refusal to name colleagues before Congress. That history gave Geer gravity and life experience that infused his performance as the Walton family patriarch with authenticity few actors could have matched. He was beloved not just by audiences, but by his castmates, many of whom have spoken over the years about how his real-life warmth and wisdom mirrored the character he played. In April 1978, Geer died of respiratory failure at the age of 76. His death was not the result of a contract dispute or a creative disagreement. It was simply the end of a long life, arriving in the middle of a production that had come to depend on his presence as much as viewers had. The show's writers made the decision to write Grandpa's death into the storyline as well, allowing the Walton family, and by extension the audience, to grieve alongside the fictional family he had helped bring to life. It was one of the most emotionally difficult creative decisions a production ever had to make, transforming real loss into a storyline that gave millions of viewers a shared experience of mourning. For a show built on the premise of family endurance through hardship, losing one of its most central figures to the ordinary, unscriptable reality of mortality was a sobering reminder that even beloved television families cannot be shielded from the passage of time. Michael Learned, who played matriarch Olivia Walton and won 3 Emmy Awards for the role, made her own decision to leave the series in 1979, after 7 seasons. Unlike Corby or Geer, Learn's departure was a matter of professional choice rather than circumstance beyond her control. She had built an extraordinary reputation for her portrayal of Olivia, widely regarded as one of the most nuanced maternal figures on American television at the time. But Learn has discussed over the years how she felt she had accomplished what she set out to do with the character, and how the desire to explore other kinds of roles, including theater work, became increasingly important to her as the years went on. Playing the same character for the better part of a decade, however acclaimed, can create a creative restlessness in an actor who wants to demonstrate range beyond a role that has come to find them in the public imagination. The production handled her exit by writing Olivia's departure into the storyline as well, giving the character a battle with tuberculosis that required her to leave the family mountain to recuperate elsewhere, a narrative solution that allowed for the possibility of Learn returning for occasional appearances without requiring her to commit to the demanding schedule of a series regular. She did return periodically in later seasons and in the reunion television movies that followed the original series' conclusion, suggesting that her departure was never about severing ties with the Walton family, either fictional or the real bonds she had built with her castmates, but about reclaiming creative autonomy at a point in her career when she felt ready for new challenges. These departures did not happen in isolation. They rippled through a production that had, by its own design, become something closer to an extended family than a typical television workplace. The show was filmed with an unusual degree of continuity, following its child actors, John Walmsley, Mary McDonough, Judy Norton, David W. Harper, Cami Cotler, and Eric Scott among them, as they grew from adolescence into young adulthood in front of the cameras. This created a bond among the cast that many of them have described in interviews and retrospectives over the decades as genuinely familial, not manufactured for publicity. Ralph Waite, who played family patriarch John Walton Sr., remained with the production for its entire run, though he too stepped away from the show for personal and political pursuits during hiatus periods, including an unsuccessful run for the United States Congress. His steady presence throughout the series, even as other cast members came and went, gave the production a sense of continuity that helped absorb the emotional shocks of losing Geer, Corby's reduced participation, and the departures of Thomas and Learned. Waite would later reflect in various interviews on how deeply the cast's real relationships mirror the closeness of the fictional Walton family, a sentiment echoed consistently by nearly every actor who spent significant time on production. What makes the story of these departures so compelling, decades later, is how differently each one unfolded, and how each reflected a distinct and very human reason for leaving a beloved role. Richard Thomas left out of ambition and a desire to avoid being permanently defined by a single character, a decision that required real professional courage at a pivotal, young stage of his life. Ellen Corby's story was one of resilience, an actress who refused to let a devastating medical event end her connection to a role and a cast she loved, choosing instead to let her real struggle become part of the character's journey. Will Geer's departure was the most painful of all, a reminder that even the most successful and beloved productions cannot write around realities of aging and mortality. And Michael Learn's exit reflected the quieter, less dramatic, but equally significant desire that many accomplished actors feel, the pull toward new creative horizons after having fully realized what a role had to offer. Earl Hamner Jr., who continued to oversee the show's creative direction and narration throughout its run, often spoke of the Waltons as an extension of the values he had been raised within rural Virginia: resilience, faith, and the unbreakable bonds of family, even through hardship. It is perhaps fitting, then, that the real story behind the show's cast changes so closely mirrors those same themes. The Walton family endured fires, floods, the Great Depression, and the Second World War on screen. Off-screen, the actors who portrayed them endured their own very real trials: illness, loss, ambition, and the simple passage of time, and in doing so, gave the show an emotional depth that no scripted storyline alone could have manufactured.